Welcome to week 2. As I mentioned, I like to start these lectures with a little quote from John Muir. Take a look. Here's where we're going this week. Science of climate change. How do we get here? Before we get there, let's take a look back at week 1 and talk about some of the important things, important concepts that came up. Talked a lot about the rise of CO2 in the atmosphere. We're going to take a closer look at this during this week's lecture, and we'll look at some of the history associated with it. And we'll decide at the end how significant this is and how much attention we should be paying to this and how rapid the rise is going to be. We also read a piece by Bill McKibben, and there was some very important information in this. And as you can see, Bill McKibben is a favorite resource of mine. He points me and us in directions in conversation that are very, very important. And as you can see in his reader, which we'll be using from week to week, we're going to use this as a guide to direct conversation for much of the course. McKibben talked about 3 numbers that are very important. First number, 2 degrees Celsius. And that's the recognized temperature rise that the planet can sustain without triggering what some people call catastrophic climate change events. Second number, 565 gigatons. This is the planetary budget for CO2 emissions into the atmosphere if we were to keep temperature rise at or below 2 degrees Celsius. And the third number, 2,795 gigatons. That's the amount of CO2 in the known fossil fuel reserves of major fossil fuel companies today. And as McKibben points out, if those are fully exploited, we've got a real problem. And he also talks a little bit about where we go and what we can do. And I want to talk about this a little bit. We'll get into this in the weeks ahead, but some of you have emailed me or have written in your blogs, what can we do? I feel like I should be doing more. And one of the things that McKibben talks about is divestment. And here are a couple of shots on divestment. And this is a growing conversation around campuses and major institutions. It has roots in opposition to big projects like the Keystone XL pipeline, which we'll talk about in weeks ahead. What the public is increasingly doing is pressuring large corporations from divest from their fossil fuel holdings. And college campuses were a starting point for this. The trusts that fund many of the colleges, the endowments, a lot of their portfolio is in areas where they see long-term strategic growth. And for a long time, fossil fuels were seen to be safe areas for economic growth. But nobody was paying attention to the environmental consequence of these. So McKibben talks a lot about divestment. We'll get into this when we get into the economics of sustainability, and we can talk about some of the economic repercussions of this opposition to the fossil fuel companies. But I wanted to mention it now just to give some of you some ideas what you might be able to do and conversations you might be able to have in your own lives. So here we go. The lecture is going to be about the science of climate change, and it has to do with tracing the history of the climate change debate. And we're going to use the McKibben Reader as a guidance tool for us, but we're going to build other content around it in this lecture module this week. So the goals for the week are to trace the historical scientific research and discussion associated with climate change. And if we do that, we will gain a better understanding of today's conversation by looking at the detail of the scientific research. Why is this important? Temperatures are rising. We need to understand what the causes of this temperature rise is in our planet, and is it significant? All evidence suggests that temperatures are increasing on a yearly basis, and we want to understand the link between things like CO2 emissions and temperature rise in our planet. We'll be looking at some data. We'll look at some of the historic research around tracking CO2 in the atmosphere and some of the people who've done very significant work over the years. And we'll take a closer look at graphs like these. And then we'll take a look at some of the conversation around these hot years and the increasing awareness that the public has. And I'll also link in some of the opposition. Some people think that the science is not settled yet. So I'm going to throw out some information, some people who are actually in opposition to what the main body of scientists around the world think is happening in terms of climate change. So with that said, keep an eye on the the learning module. Keep an eye on your assignments. Make sure you do the readings for the week. There's going to be a quiz that I will post on Friday and give you guys, a day or two to finish the quiz. And there will be a second part to this lecture, which I will introduce on Thursday. So with that, we'll dive right in.